morning. Like, it's been so crazy. We forgot, me, okay, I completely forgot the vinyls at home. So we go to set everything up, and we're like, oh, no vinyls. We have a long way away. Okay, so we had to get someone together, bring it, So, okay, I just need to breathe. And then, we're using Mr. Potato Head for something this morning. I couldn't find it anywhere. I had to stop at Walmart, go buy another one. I think my dogs ate it. Like, it's nowhere. Like, it was in a plastic bag, and it's gone. Okay, so that's really frustrating to me. So, anyway, we're here, and we've got 45 minutes, and I'm going to lunch. So all is good at this point. Okay, Sheila Walsh tickets. If you do not, if you're new, okay, speaking of new, if someone has one of these on, they're new. Say hello to them. Hello, new people, okay, because we want them to think we're really nice and friendly, which we kind of are, but sometimes you never, you know, we get in our cliques because we're women, that's just kind of what we do. Okay, so Sheila Walsh, if you are new and you don't know she's coming to town, got her coming in January. Tickets are back there. And if you don't know who she is, she travels with Women of Faith. She was the co-host with Pat Robertson for the 700 Club. Went through a serious meltdown, depression, ended up in like kind of a mental institute thing. And she shares her story about how God came and just healed her through this whole situation. Now, she just came out with a new book called, I think it's called The Storms Within or something like that. So she'll be here for 3 sessions, and the first one I want her to deal with the depression thing because that was the reason why we brought her in. The second one, I'm going to probably have her talk about her new book. And then the third session will be a question and answer. So we'll get together and pull a bunch of questions from you guys and whatever you want to ask her, and we'll kind of go from that. So Thanksgiving's over. Is that hallelujah? Okay. I think I gained 1,000,000 pounds. I don't normally eat dinner at night, and I ate like a pig. So. Nothing fits, and I'm miserable, but all I want to do is eat, so I need some M&Ms. Okay, does anybody watch The Mentalist? Okay, yes, that makes me feel better. Okay, so none of you will get this except our Mentalist fans. Rob and I watch it, I don't know how many seasons it's on, 1 billion, I think. But if you don't know the premise, like, someone killed Patrick Jane's wife and daughter, and so he's been out looking for them for all these years. So he's looking for someone by the name of Red John. So a week ago Sunday, they finally were going to reveal who Red John was. Okay, we were so excited, were we like so excited? And Rob fell asleep at 7 o'clock. And I'm like, oh no, I can't watch this by myself because we've been looking forward to it and didn't want to wake him up. So the dogs freaked out. There was a coyote outside our window at like 2 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. So we woke up and then we couldn't go back to sleep. So I'm like, hey, are you awake? Let's watch The Mentalist at 2 a.m. in the morning. So there we were, Monday morning. So that was our little thing. What else happened this week? Cheyenne and her little boyfriend, is kind of cute because they both have jobs. And so they decided together that they're in high school, okay. Together they're going to sponsor a child in Africa. Well, first they said adopt a child. I'm like, whoa, 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 we're like in high school, we're not adopting children. And so they're going to sponsor a child. And so after she left, I looked at Rob and I said, that's so cute, but I said, I have no idea they're in high school. So when they break up, like, who's going to get custody of the child? I'm assuming it's going to be mom and dad. So we'll be a grandparent again. So, okay, anyway, thank you for coming for December. Like, we're the only Goofy study that stays open. We've never done this before for 3 weeks, but so I'm glad that you guys showed up. And I want to tell you about some more exciting news after Sheila. What our passion is here, and I think you know that, is making sure that we know what the Bible says about everything, because this is like our manual for life. And if we have to know this in order to be able to understand like false religions, false teaching, whatever comes our way, we have to know this. And so last week I was just happened to be online for some reason, and I found an article of a woman who, it said, I was a Mormon for 30 years and left the church. And I was shocked because we have Mormon cousins and a whole side that are Mormons, and it makes me so sad I can't reach them. I don't know how to reach them. And the interesting thing about this woman's story is that she said they went to a Protestant church, and when these little missionary boys knocked on her door, they just said, because it says the Church of Jesus Christ, they just assumed it was a Christian church, and they joined it, and they spent 30 years in this church, and she knows the inner workings of it and how they left. It's the coolest story. Anyway, I get a hold of her, and I'm like, I need you at Bible study. So she just came out with a book. Her name is Lynn Wilder, called Unveiling Grace, And I was going to read you the back, but I don't have my glasses on. She's a BYU, a tenured professor, and she and her whole family walked away from the church. It's the most amazing story. And they left because her son, that was on a Mormon mission trip, his second year in, he went to, they kind of go to these pastors. He went to like a Calvary Baptist, I think, pastor, and he was trying to share the Mormon gospel with them. And the man just said, I'm so glad that you're here, but you're wrong. And if you would just read the New Testament with eyes of a child. And he started doing that, and God used that to show him the differences between the Mormon God and the Mormon Jesus and the God of the Bible and the Jesus of the Bible. So it's really important for us in here to know those kind of things. So when someone comes to the door, is it cold in here? Yeah, I just tell them that. Yeah. I can never tell. It's hot because this is the morning. So anyway, okay, so she's coming in February, the very last weekend, last Wednesday in February. So we're going to get your friends together, and anyone that you know that's a Mormon or thinking of becoming a Mormon, or if you want to know, this is going to be a really, really important thing for us in here, so that we got to know what's true and what's false in this world. Okay, but today we're not going to talk about Joseph Smith. We're going to talk about Joseph in the Bible, the real Bible. And what we're going to talk about is our new series called The Equation. It's going to be all on the life of Joseph. And when I started putting this together, this is off of our new book that Rob and I wrote. And when I started putting this together, it was raining that day. And it was so weird when it rains in Phoenix because nobody knows what to do. We don't know how to drive when it rains. It's all confusing. And so Cheyenne, she had a student council thing, and she needed all of the tablecloth things on here. So I picked all of them up and I took them in there and to her school, and the lady at the front desk is just totally frazzled. And she's like, it's just been the worst day. 3 kids were in car accidents right around Liberty that day because of the rain, and no one knew what to do. And so it made me think about what this book is all about. Because sometimes when you and I have storms that come into our life, we don't know what to do. We panic. And so that's what this whole book is about. It's about what do we do when the storms come and just come in on us. Now, I have this video. We're going to see if this actually works because it did 5 seconds ago, but so you have to watch this. And let's see if I can make this work. It's just like a minute.
It's on the ground! The tornadoes are reported 68 of them left impassable roads, widespread electrical outages, and blocks of homes stripped bare.
I know there's been other tornadoes and tragedies in recent years that were horrible too, and you always watch TV and say, well, that would never happen to us.
In hard-hit Illinois, at least 6 people have died. Dozens more are injured. Search and rescue operations continue Monday. The governor has declared 7 counties disaster areas. In Lebanon, Indiana, a sheriff's deputy caught the approaching twister on his dash cam. The wind flipped a car into the patio area of this Starbucks and blew out the windows of the building.
Our Father who art in heaven.
Anthony Corey prayed as the tornado approached his home in Washington, Illinois.
I just couldn't believe it. We just saw like just pieces of homes and cars just flying up in the air and just destruction.
The storm tore apart an Indiana factory while workers were inside, but no one was injured.
I seen the rain start swirling and I just took off running. Next thing I know, stuff was flying next to me.
Mid-broadcast in Peoria, Illinois, these news anchors had to cut their coverage and evacuate.
We may need to take shelter right now ourselves.
We do.
We need to go up here.
Yeah.
We will be back when we can.
Right. We'll be right back.
Smart people. Okay, so I was watching that and it dawned on me that that's what happens in our life a lot of times. That sometimes, like you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, it's so nice out, it's a little cloudy, and then all of a sudden, those storms look terrifying. Like we live in Phoenix, so we don't have stuff like that. But it was, to me, watching that was so frightening. And then it dawned on me that that's what happens in your life and in my life. And it's not hurricanes and tornadoes and sleet and snow and all those kind of things. But it's something that you wake up to and it absolutely just rocks your world. It's like, it's the storm that comes crashing in, and we always say things like, your husband tells you like he doesn't love you and he wants you a divorce, okay? And you're like, what? We've been married for 40 years. And he's like, yeah, our kids are gone and I'm just kind of done. I want to go play the field. And you're like, what am I going to do now? Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. We had a friend of ours that he was called Rob, and he said, I'm going to go in tomorrow morning because I have this like pain in my heart. And he said, I don't really know what it is. And he had just gotten married, had a new wife, and literally he was eating a bowl of cereal and boom, he was gone in 5 seconds. You know, so those are the things, they're just storms that come in your life. It could be an addiction. I have to tell you my new addiction, okay? Elevate Coffee, if no one knows where that is. It's at Norterra, okay? I don't drink coffee, but Rob gave me a frozen hot chocolate, okay? I can't even tell you. So I order it like, I could have a frozen hot chocolate with no calories, plus whipped cream with no calories, okay? So it's the best drink ever. Okay, so I go there in the morning, and then it's like I have to stop by there in the afternoon, and it's a bad thing. So I'm addicted to hot chocolate like that. But for you, it could be something like you just realize I'm addicted, and I can't get past this. A physical illness, a loss of a job. Maybe your 15-year-old daughter or granddaughter just comes home and says, guess what, Mom, I'm having a baby. And you're like, ah, okay. So this is life. This is life, and it's filled with storms, and it's not going to go away. But our job is going to be to figure out, how do I make it through the storm as a follower of Christ? And I realize that as a follower of Jesus, when these storms come in our lives, we have a choice. And what we can either go find our umbrella, which if you live in Phoenix that morning, I had no idea where our umbrella was. Okay, so these are our options here. It's so funny because other states are like, I don't even know how to work it. Okay, that's what's even weirder. Okay, so here's our options. So we can stand underneath the umbrella when the storm comes, or we can stand outside of the umbrella and get wet and miserable. And that was my choice that morning. I said, okay, I'm gonna go find my umbrella, and then I gotta get underneath it and walk to my car, because otherwise my hair would be frizzy and I would be wet and cold. I do not like to be wet and cold. So those are our options in life. But the same is true for our options when something bad happens to us. And what I realized when I went to get the umbrella is that I had to look for it. And so for us, when something bad comes in our life, we need to go to God's Word and figure out what He says in here that's going to help me make it through the storm that comes into my life. Because remember, storms are sudden, and a lot of times we don't even know they're coming, and they kind of rock our world when they do. Now, we have a choice to run for cover underneath God and say, okay, God, I'm under here, and I'm going to be safe and secure, and now you're going to walk with me through this. Or if we go outside of that, we're going to become bitter and angry and frustrated and miserable and cry, and we're going to have lots of issues over here. But under the umbrella, we can go through the storm completely different than if we didn't. Now, in our book, we talk about Joseph, because Joseph went through storm after storm after storm in his life. And what was really great about him is that he didn't stand there and just let it hit him and let it affect his life in a bad way. He took the storms and always turned it into a, God, what do you want me to do with this? And I think if we can learn that, it will completely change how we view bad things. The phone call in the middle of the night, the daughter that says she's pregnant. We don't have to freak out. And we learned that from Joseph. So, as we begin, I want you to think of yourself as being one of 12 boys, let's just say, and 10 of them hate you, okay? They just don't even like you, and they want to get rid of you because you're daddy's favorite. And so now what these boys do is they sell him into slavery, and now he gets sold into Egypt, and they lie to the dad and tell him that, he died. And I was trying to figure out a modern day way to put this. And our son right now, we have a business, and it's in China, and so business is kind of crazy right now, so he had to go to China. So I thought, if our boys didn't like him, which thankfully they do, they could have messed up his visa. They could have called the Chinese government and said, hey, when this kid gets off the plane, he's a spy, you need to get him, and now he ends up in a foreign country, in China, in prison, and our boys are like, I don't know what happened to my guy. I don't know, he was just gone, went off the radar, no idea. So it's kind of like that. And this is where we find Joseph, is that his brothers do this to him, and Joseph ends up in a foreign country, not knowing anybody. The culture's different, everything. And yet that's where God put him. And so my question that I was thinking was, what would happen to you and to me if that would happen? Like, we would be so confused and angry and frustrated, but how would we handle, how would you handle it? Would you fall apart? What would happen when you have a storm that comes in your life? Because Joseph felt such betrayal, and a lot of you feel that because you've gone through really horrific divorces, you're in custody battles with your ex, you've got a lot of, and there's been betrayal, and you just don't know how to get past that and make it all better. And I want to tell you why we wrote this book, because we had somebody that was really close to us that felt that kind of betrayal. It wasn't like someone threw them into prison, but it was something that came in that was that this person was lying to them and deceiving them and stealing from them and doing all this stuff. And this was someone really close to us. And honestly, it destroyed me. I was so angry and so bitter and so frustrated, and I did not know what to do, because I wanted to defend this person. I wanted to say, you know, how could you treat this person like this? And you can't. And so I remember in Flagstaff, I was walking up to the house, and I was so angry about this whole situation. And God gave me an equation, and that's how this whole book came to be about. And this is what he reminded me. 1 + 1 = 2. And 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. And my problem is that I was living in the 1 + 1 = 2 equation, which is me plus my problem is going to equal a lot of yucky stuff. It's gonna be jealousy, it's gonna be anger, bitterness, whatever that is, revenge, all those ucky stuff is me plus my problem equals that. But God really showed me that if I added one more number into that and made it me plus my problem plus God, it comes out to be 3, not 2 any longer. So now we have a different answer to the questions. And I will tell you that when I put God into this whole equation, it changed my life. It changed how I felt, because now instead of being disappointed and angry and hateful, I somehow could be peaceful and content and just know that God is in this whole situation. And the problem is that when you're going through a storm like that, you can't see what's coming down the road. You can't see what, because you're right in the midst of it, like those tornadoes coming at you, and you're like, if I don't seek shelter, I'm like going to die here, okay? And somehow I had to add God into this equation and say, God, I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why you're putting this storm in this person that we love's life, why you're putting it in our life. Like, I don't understand that. But somehow knowing he was involved changed everything. It wasn't now about me and the problem. Now he could be involved in everything that I was going through. And I realized that without inserting him in the problem, I would be a different person. I would be bitter, and I would be hateful, and I would want revenge. All those negativity things that come into our life, I would want that if I didn't add God into the equation. So by putting him into there, now I see that God has a purpose and a reason for allowing this person to go through what he did. And so my question for us is, how do we get there? How do we get to that point where we can go through the storms, the tornadoes of life, and say, you know what, it's okay. It's not going to affect me, because I'm underneath the shelter of the umbrella, and I'm underneath God's protection, and as difficult as it is and it looks around me, I'm going to be okay with it. And the reason why is because we have to realize that that's why God gives us his word. And that's why in here we're always telling people, read the word, read the word, read the word. Because that's where we're going to find all the people in the Bible that went through storm after storm, and how did they handle it, and how did they learn how to put their trust and faith in God. And back then it was a lot harder than it is here today. But I want us to remember that the Bible is our manual for all the complications in our life. And it shows us that that's how God wants us to handle our storms, is right in there. But we're not going to know it, just like me going and searching for the umbrella. I don't get my Bible out and start searching for some answers in there. And you do that by looking at people like Job or Abraham or Isaac or all these people who went through storms in their life. We see how they responded to it. And when we did that, suddenly our God becomes really, really big. So, Joseph is the perfect example for us 2,000 years later on how we should handle the storms in our life. So we're going to find Joseph. We have the smallest handout. Like, whoever has a one-page handout here? It's the weirdest thing. Like, apparently I'm talking a lot and there's no verses, so I don't know how that plays. But this is kind of like the start of the series, so we're going to get a lot of background on Joseph, and so there isn't a lot of verses apparently. So Genesis 37:1 says, "Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan." So let's get into some history about little Joseph before we even start, so you understand when he gets thrown in prison, why that even happens and why his brothers hate him so much. So many years ago, God called Abraham. Abraham is Joseph's great-great-grandfather, and Abraham was living in modern-day Iraq, and God called him and said, I want you to move, and I'm going to build a nation, which we now know is the Jewish nation, and I want you to move into the land of Israel. I'm going to give this land to you for you and your descendants. And the problem is that Abraham was older and didn't have any children, and God was like, I'm going to make you a big nation. And he's like, really, when? So we get to see all the storms in Abraham's life, up, down, up, down, up, down, on just trying to have a child. Okay, so now Abraham has Isaac, and Isaac then turns around and has two sons, Jacob and Esau. The problem with Jacob and Esau, if you were with us for Genesis, we always said Jacob was kind of a mama's boy. She would sit around watching the cooking channel, is how we did with his mom. That's just kind of how he was. He was just different. Esau, on the other hand, was like, you can picture him at the gym, Jerusalem gym. He's pumping iron, he's out hunting, he's just a total man's man. You can see him in the bar brawling. I mean, that's kind of how you picture Esau. So they have a run-in one day, and Esau comes back from hunting and he's starving, and of course Jacob had a really nice meal, and so Jacob steals his birthright is what happens. And now Esau's furious, and I'm pretty certain you don't want Esau to be furious with you. So Jacob had to run for his life, is what happens. So he goes to, his mom says, go to my brother Laban. So Jacob runs to Uncle Laban. So it's a long way away, so he's hoping Esau doesn't know where he's at. And there, he falls in love with his cousin, okay? I have to tell you my funny cousin story, because to us, falling in love with your cousin is really weird, okay? But think about this. Back then, you have Adam and Eve. Well, they got kids, they got to intermarry, and then they got to intermarry cousins and future cousins, and that's how God populated the earth. Now, when Jacob comes along right here, there's no law. Like, Moses has not been here, so there's no law that says you can't marry someone close to you. That comes later on when Moses comes on the scene. So for the moment, marrying your cousin wasn't that big of a deal, however that plays out. But here's my cousin story. I have a cute cousin that came to visit us. I must have been like 5. Okay? And for some reason, at 5, there still is something weird about your cousin holding your hand, because we were watching a movie and he grabbed a hold of my hand, and honestly at 5, I thought I was going to get pregnant. Okay? So I was convinced now that not only was my cousin holding my hand, but now I didn't know how I was going to break it to my parents that I was going to have a baby. Okay? I have no idea where that came from, but I figure even at that young age, you kind of know nowadays that the whole cousin thing is kind of a little odd. So, but that's what they did back then. So anyway, Jacob falls in love with Rachel. And Jacob promises Laban, Uncle Laban, that he would work 7 years for her hand in marriage. So he does, and then they decide to get married because he's fulfilled in 7 years, and it's a very exciting time. The problem is that, and this is the weirdest scene in the Bible because I have no idea how this happens. Laban puts his oldest daughter Leah in the wedding. Maybe they're veiled. I don't know. Maybe there's no candles. I try to picture the wedding night going. Anyway, Laban inserts Leah, the oldest sister. I don't know what happened to Rachel. Like, I figured Cinderella locked her in a room someplace, and now Jacob marries Leah unbeknownst to him, and so now he wakes up in the morning with Leah and not Rachel. Now, to me, the whole scene is weird. I'm like, do they not have candles? Do you not talk? Like, before you have sex for the first time? Like, I have no idea how this worked out for them. It was just the weirdest scene in the whole entire world. But Jacob wakes up the next morning to find that he has been duped by Uncle Laban. Now he promises to work 7 more years. Okay, so you see all this drama. So for Jacob, he worked 7 years. Now he's got 2 wives who are sisters. And the problem is that the love of his life, Rachel, can't have babies. And she's so sad and she's so frustrated. And yet Leah can have all the babies. So she's getting pregnant all the time and baby after baby. And Rachel's over here sad and miserable because her sister gets all the babies. So she decides to do something like, hey, I'm going to give my maid to Jacob. And he'll have babies, she'll have babies, and they'll be mine. Okay, And then Leah decides that she's going to have her maids involved. So now you've got all of these kids. So all of this to say, this is where Joseph's life was. All of these brothers that hate him so much are from Leah and the maids and all that craziness that went on right there. And then finally, God decides to open Rachel's womb and she gets pregnant. Now, I understand the whole not being able to get pregnant thing. It's hard to imagine. We have 7 kids now, but before we had 7 kids, I could not get pregnant. I went on fertility pills, nothing worked. I know that heartbreak that she felt. And some of you feel that way here if you never were able to have kids, or you want grandbabies and you can't seem to get pregnant, and you're just like, But I remember one time I had pneumonia and I went into the hospital. I mean, this is how bad I wanted a baby. Deathly ill. Say, come home from the hospital, look at Rob and say, ovulating time, okay, let's go. And he's like, okay, you're like on your deathbed. I'm like, let's go, ovulating time. So I know that feeling of wanting a baby so bad, and so I feel for Rachel when I feel for her probably more than anyone. But then look what happens in Genesis 30:22. Then God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. So she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach, and she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord give me another son. So there's our Joseph. Now you see the family that he's born into. And then she gets pregnant again, and which is kind of cool, but then it's kind of sad what happens. Genesis 35:15. So Jacob named the place where God had spoken to him Bethel. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, do not fear, you now have another son. It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben. His father called him Benjamin. So what we see here is that through all of this, Jacob has 10 sons from a woman that he doesn't love, maids he couldn't care less about, and he's got 2 absolutely adored children from the woman that he just loved with all of his heart. And that's where the whole problem starts. Because these 10 boys know that Joseph is his dad's favorite, and so that causes a lot of problems. And so I want to just say this for those of you that have lots of kids or lots of grandkids, and this is just a sidebar. When you have a lot of kids and grandkids, it's hard they're all different. And sometimes it's easy to have favorites, because if you're a quiet person, you like the quiet grandchildren. If you're loud, you like the loud grandchildren. Some play violin, some play hockey. That's just the way it works. And so what we have to be challenged to do here is love them and treat them all the same, and realize that God created them the way he created them. And that's why we can love them and not, because otherwise we're going to have this crazy dysfunctional family like Joseph. I was thinking, it reminded me of the body of Christ and how he wants us as the church, he gives us different gifts. And I don't know, did everyone see that Billy Graham special? Did a lot of people see that? It was so cool. I found it on Netflix, just on accident the other night. And if you've never watched it, you need to. It's his last thing that he probably is going to do. But there's a girl that they interview in there. Her name is Lacey Sturm, and she grew up and she had a really bad childhood, and she finally one night said, I'm going to kill myself. Tomorrow I'm done, I'm out of here, and I'm just not doing this anymore. So she comes home from school, and her grandmother was there. And her grandmother is never at her house. And so the grandmother said, Lacey, something's wrong with you. You need to come with me to church. And she said she fought with her, and she's like, I'm not going to church. You're not going to make me do that. She said, but I got tired of fighting with my grandma, so I went. Like go in the church, sit in the back seat, slump down, arms folded, hating everyone. Hate the people, hate the music, hate the pastor, hate everyone. And the pastor stands up and says, there is a spirit of suicide in this room. And she said the back of her hair stood up on her neck, and she was like, and so it freaked her out. So she gets up and she walks out the door, and there's a gentleman, an older man standing at the door, and he said, I want you to know before you leave that God loves you. He wanted me to tell you that he knows that you cry every night before you go to sleep. He knows what you're going to do. But I want to pray for you because he doesn't want you to do that. And he told me to tell you that he would be a better father to you than your earthly father ever was. Okay, well that kind of would be enough to just like slap you in the face. And it did. She came to Christ, gave her life to him, and it was a really, really cool story. But I went to bed that night and I was frustrated because I'm like, why don't I have that gift? Like, why can't I look out and say, I know what you're going through? And I don't. I have no idea. And it frustrates me. And finally, God just spoke to my heart and said, I didn't give that gift to you. Like, I want you to teach. I want someone else to do that. I want someone to speak in tongues. I want someone to heal. I want someone to give money. Everyone's got different gifts, and that's what makes up the whole body. And that's why our little Mr. Potato Head came around here. Because I started thinking, what if what if that was what we look like? Okay? We would look so funny if we didn't have like a nose or eyes, or I don't know how to put this thing together. But let's say you have an eye, but then maybe you just have one ear, okay? And so I started thinking about this with our kids, and I thought, all of our kids, we have kids that are ears, okay? And we have kids that are hands, and some that are feet, and that's just the way God made them. He didn't make us all the same. And he has a purpose for making each one of us completely different. And in our family, we have kids that are brainiacs, and kids that are salesmen, and kids that are quiet and loud and strong-willed and not strong-willed. But it reminded me how important it is for us to grab a hold of the fact that God made each one of our kids and grandkids completely different, and we need to embrace them for who they are. And that's hard to do sometimes when they have a completely opposite personality from what is easy for us. Now, I want to go back to the part where it says God opened Rachel's womb, because I think that Rachel would have been a different person if she had learned to add God into the equation of her life was being miserable. It's like, God, I can't have babies, and I'm so sad, and I'm frustrated and angry. But the problem that Rachel didn't do is, the thing that she didn't do is look at this overall big arching picture of God. Because sometimes when we start going through storms, we see what's right in front of us. We can't see past the storm. And what I want us to do from the life of Rachel, say, I need to see beyond the storm and what's going to happen. Because in hindsight, when we read, what we see is how God used her inability to get pregnant for the nation of Israel. Like, he actually said, Rachel, I'm not going to let you get pregnant. See, this is how big our God is. He's the one who stopped her from getting pregnant, made sure she never could get pregnant, because he knew that when she did, it was the perfect timing for when Israel was going into a famine and Joseph was going to be right where he needed to be, which was in prison at the time in Egypt. But it was this whole long line of God still knew what he was doing, even though Joseph was going through all of these storms. He had no idea. Rachel had no idea. And so I was thinking about, are we focused so much on our life today and the storm that we're in that we tend to forget that there's a future and that God really does have a reason for allowing things to happen in our life. Now, I have this little chart over here. I'll use this one over here. And I had someone make this because I thought it was kind of cute. But this is Rachel's life. So Sheila is like, oh, no one loves me. It's like the clouds. You probably can't see that over there. I'll do it this way. There. See? Oh. Okay. So you have this life. And this is Rachel's life. And she's like, oh, no one loves me. I'm a little shepherdess. Oh, yay. Jacob loves me. Woohoo, we're getting married. Oh, Daddy locked me up, and now my sister married him. Oh, yay, he wants to marry me. Oh, I'm so sad I can't have kids. Oh, yay, I can have a kid. Oh, I die. Okay, so as sad as that is, that's like Rachel's life, okay? But then I started thinking, that's our life, okay? Right there. Because we're not going to live this life of just that black line in the center where everything's just okay, or that we're on that top line. That is our life right there. And so I want us to make sure that we can add God into the equation on the bottom section, because if we do, I think we can go through smiling even though we're underneath that umbrella. And I really believe we can. And I think that this is how Rachel should have done it. She should have said, God, and this is how you can fill in your blank to this. God, I don't like this. And I don't think that this is fair. And some of you are right there. And you're like, what I'm going through is not fair. And yet, for Rachel, she's like, you gave my sister all the babies. And you allowed that to happen, and I don't understand it. And yet, and this is where she didn't do that we need to learn from her. God, I'm going to trust that you have a plan that I can't get pregnant. And for you it may be, God, I'm going to trust that you're in this divorce. I'm going to trust that you're in my child getting pregnant. I'm going to trust that you're in this financial problem that we're having. And that's living underneath that umbrella. And Rachel didn't do that. And because she didn't, she was a mess. She was jealous, and she was hateful of her sister, and it was a bad life for her. But I think when we look back, we can see that God had a purpose for everything. So let's look at your life today. Bankruptcy. Some of you are having to file bankruptcy because of the whole craziness. And you're like, how could that happen? Wanting a baby, wanting a grandchild, we talked about that. Wayward children. We had a child that went off to college. I know I told you, and he was going to go in the ministry and instead went into a fraternity. Just his life was a crazy, crazy life after that. So I get that. It's like that moment where you're like, yay, my son wants to be in the ministry. Oh, he's in a fraternity, and he's doing everything we taught him not to do. Okay, those are storms that you just don't know how to weather. And I remember being so mad at him all the time. And finally, I just had to get to a point saying, God, he is yours. Okay, I can't continue to worry and stress, because that's what happens. We get stressful in our life when we take all of this upon ourselves. If we don't get underneath that umbrella, we're out there in the open, just for all these emotions and craziness that's coming in. I was thinking sickness. I talked to a lady the other day. I was standing at Costco, and we were looking at pita bread, okay? And we just got talking, and I don't even know how we ended up on the conversation. She said, I just got over having tongue cancer. And I'm like, okay, that's gross. But I don't know who gets tongue cancer. And she says, and it's not there any longer, but now I just got breast cancer. Okay, those are some really big storms in your life. And what in the world do you do with that? Some of you are so fearful of the future right now. Like, you are fearful of Obama and Obamacare and health care and how am I going to afford it and what I'm going to do. And see, those are just storms, and that's just life. And once we get under the umbrella and say, God, I don't know how you're going to play this out, but I'm going to live it out underneath the umbrella of you, because you're going to protect me and take care of me. Now, whatever problem that you're going through in your life, I want you to look at Joseph and look at this. Joseph's life had God's hand on it from before he was even born. Like Abraham, Isaac, his ancestors. And it made me think of your life and my life. Like, God had his hand on us before we were ever even born. And when you look at it like that, when the storms come in our life, we think God has disappeared. And we have to realize that's not true. Even though we don't feel him, or we don't see him, and everything looks bad, that's not true. We have to look at Joseph and say, God knew where Joseph was every single step along the way. In prison, when his brothers sold him, when his mommy died, when all the bad stuff happened. God never left him, but he had a purpose in it. And we have to realize that God always has a purpose in financial problems, if you don't have kids or grandkids, if you're single, heartache, bad marriage. There's always intention, if you're a follower of Christ, that God is doing something in your life. And we have to grasp that, and that's how we can live in peace. Because we can sit back and say, I don't understand this, and I really, really don't like it, but I know you're in it. And when I know that, then I can have peace. I was thinking about we had 5 kids. Micah was the youngest, and he was 8. And I remember that Rob and I worked together, and we had our own business, so I worked a couple days. My life was perfect. Like, it really was perfect. I told Rob, the kids are in school all day, hallelujah. we work together, we get along, marriage is great, everything's great. And 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I knew something was wrong. I took a pregnancy test at like 3 in the morning, sat on the side of the bed and sobbed. I was like, I don't want a baby. I literally do not want a child. Like, I love my life, okay? I don't want cribs. My mom took us crib shopping. I'm in tears. I don't want to do swings. I don't know what that left. It just was horrifying to me. And yet, I look back at that time, and then we got pregnant again, okay? And I told Robbie, I said, I'm not coming home from the hospital unless you have a vasectomy. So we're just not even doing that anymore. So anyway, but I can literally trace this ministry to those kids. Because we started a Bible study from a lady that babysat Dusty, and that's how this whole thing started. So what didn't make sense to me back then, and what really made me cry and frustrated and sad and miserable at the time, now I look back and I say, God, this is so awesome how you wove that up and down to where we are today. So we have to start looking at the future instead of looking in what's right in front of us. We have to realize that whatever we're going through, he has a purpose. I found a definition of the word purpose that's in your handout, and this is it. Purpose, the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. Okay, think about that in your life. You were born on purpose. You are going through what you're going through on purpose, which means that God is saying, I have a reason for everything that's happening in your life if you're a follower of Christ, and we'll talk about that in a second. He has a reason for you being born. You're not an accident here, okay? So when you embrace that and you say, okay, I'm going to take today and look to the future, whatever, and say, God, you're doing something, but I just don't know what. There's always an intention on his part if you are a follower of his. Now, I told you that we have 7 kids, and the last 2 showed up shockingly. And Cheyenne just asked me the other day, she said, Mom, she said, was I an accident? And I said, you know, honey, there are no accidents when it comes to God. There just isn't. And we have to realize, I said, you weren't planned by us, but you were clearly planned by God, okay? But that's okay. And our storms are like that. They're not planned by us. They just show up. And yet we have to, when we add God into the equation, then we can go, okay, I have a whole different perspective now. Now it's not just me and my problem. It's me and my problem with God added into it, and now everything looks completely different to me. I know most of you know about our money situation, and a lot of people join us on Roku, so I like to just share with you every so often. But I know I've told you we had a lot of money before, and I will tell you we had millions of dollars, okay? That's how much money we had. We had it in a bank account, we had land, we had all of these things. When the economy took a dive, we lost everything. Like, the land became gone, all the stock market, we couldn't get our money out, everything crashed. We literally lost everything. I told you we had $262 to our name a few years ago. And I just told Rob, I said, I was telling him the other day, I said, for 5 years we've been struggling, just because we have our own business and all of the money gets poured into that. And it's like, you finally think you're going to get ahead and you don't, and it's so frustrating. And I told Rob the other day, I said, I am so tired of being broke, like, I really am. But then it dawned on me that our life is really good, and being broke has been okay. And then I started tracing it, why is it so bearable? And it's because when we lost everything, we added God into the equation. And now, I know that everything's okay because he brought that into our life for a reason. And it doesn't mean that I don't want our money back. I always tell God, I learned my lesson, now can I have our money back? And he still says no. I don't understand that yet. But it doesn't mean I don't miss having money. And for you guys, it may be something completely different. Maybe you are divorced and you're like, you still do miss being married, or you still miss that person, or you still, I mean, just because you're under that umbrella doesn't mean you're still going to not have feelings about things in your life. But I will tell you, what gets us through that is adding God into the equation, saying, you know, God, you have me broke for a reason. Whatever that is, I'm going with it. And I will tell you this, I look back now, and if somebody were to come to me and say, here's a check for the millions that you lost, that you had in that account, but you have to discount the last 5 years, everything you learned about God, would you do it? And I would not. I would take that check and I would rip it up, because I can't tell you, suddenly money doesn't mean anything to me. But my relationship with God, I have learned so much. I know how to trust him and to seek him and to ask him to help us. And now I depend on him. I never did that before. And so when we go through the storms in our life, when we add him in, now our perspective changes. Now it's not so much money any longer. It's, God, I'm just going to trust you for what I need, okay? And if you're divorced and it's struggling, it's like, God, I'm sad, but I'm going to trust you for what I need. Whatever that storm is in your life, we need to realize that God is the one that is providing for us. And so what we learned from the life of Joseph also, and we have so much to talk about, but we're not going to even get to anything, which really frustrates me. I don't know what the problem is today. Okay, anyway, here's another problem, and we'll end with this. If you have had a really bad life thus far, you came from a divorced family, your dad was an alcoholic, your mom was a prostitute, I mean, whatever, you were poor, you were an orphan, whatever your issue is, sometimes we can use that as an excuse. And sometimes what we can do is we say, you know what, God, there's our umbrella again. So, when I stand out here, I'm going to be a victim. And I'm going to say, you know what, God, I don't like the way my past was. And I'm the way I am because my parents treated me like this, or my dad was this way, or I was abused, or whatever. And God's saying, here you go. Get under my umbrella. Because if you get over here, you won't look at it like that any longer. You'll look at it like, you know what, God, you gave me that past for a reason. You allowed these things to happen. And you want to use me in that situation to help other people. And now I'm underneath your umbrella because of that. And that's the place that he wants us to live. And the problem is, that's hard to do sometimes, especially when you don't know how to undo an umbrella, okay? It needs to rain more often here. So, but anyway, I just wanted to say that as we study the life of Joseph, I want us to learn that everything he did in his life was adding God into his equation of his life. And I want us to walk away today saying, God is that big. He's that big to be in control of your storm. He is that involved in your life. He does have a purpose for everything that you're going through. And I want us to walk away saying, okay, I have been living my life with me plus my problem. And it's doing nothing but making me miserable. I'm sad all the time. I'm on antidepressants all the time. I'm sleeping pills at night. I'm drinking too much. I'm taking whatever, because I can't cope with life. And yet, God says, if you just add me into the equation, you won't need to do all that. Because suddenly you're going to look at your life completely different because you're under my umbrella, and you're going to be able to say, okay, God, all this junk that's happening in my life, I know that you're in it. And that's what I had to do. When I got so angry with this person, this is what I had to do. And hopefully you can learn from this. I stopped. When I would start feeling that anger rise, and I'd say, nope, God is in it. He is in it. And I had to tell myself that 1,000,000 times if I had to. Then I started feeling bitter, and I would get those bitter feelings, and I feel that betrayal come up in my life, and I think, ooh, I'm just so angry. And I'd have to stop and say, you know what, nope, I'm not going to do that. God, you're going to use this. I have no idea how, but you're going to use this, and I'm going to trust that. And then there would be days when I could see such sadness and heartache from this person, and I'd be like, God, how is this ever going to come out? And finally I had to get to the point of saying, God, I'm going to trust you, because I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to trust that you've got this really, really great plan. And so that's our starting of what we're going to learn from him. And I just want to encourage you that whatever storm you're in right now, add him into the equation, and your life will be so different. I promise you that.